topics in the film. And then beyond that is like this broken system, so this broken soil, and then these people are trying to sell into the system that's not supporting them, and whether that's broken big ag, big pharmaceutical, big food. In particularly our supermarkets come up time and time again in the film that they don't support farmers, and if people are producing things at a certain price, they're not paying it, so farmers aren't being paid properly. But we are what we eat, and Toby can share that with you more today. So yeah, that's where we're at. The other thing we're doing is working with partners. So there's an amazing organisation called Sustain, which a lot of you may know. Sustainable food places are throughout Britain. There's quite a lot in London, and they're going to be doing screenings for us. But we're going to work with people like Sustain, Soil Alliance, Soil Association, Sustainable Soil Alliance, who are lobbyists for soil. The other organisations, there's one called Country Trust, to work with kids. But all of them have helped us navigate this subject, trying to make a story that's not full of bullshit, and literally help us with the campaigning side. So when you watch it, I'm actually an environmental campaigner. Background, I do have a TV background. I've got a lovely team. We're all volunteers. Apart from those, like the editors, we've now fundraised for them. But the essence of it is we've got storytellers, etc., disseminating it all to try and make it interesting. But those partners we will guide people afterwards. We're hoping we can have this website we're going to have afterwards where people will be able to go and dig into the subject a bit deeper. And there'll be impacts that, there'll be like sign a campaign, or if you want to farm differently, if you want to garden differently, if you just want to learn more about the subject. We want to also have events around it. So if anyone here wants to screen it, you've got a place. We want to screen it well, inside, dark, a sensible location where you can have people, but out of it have events where you'd have a panel of speakers and people like Toby who are actually doing it on the ground. You could ask some questions and talk about the subject, but then celebrate with food. You could have someone like Nourished Communities there bringing all the food to the party, as we did. Rollo and I did an event with Harrison Hayes and Mills Fabrica, and it just gets people to talk about the subject even further rather than just running off. And you clearly all care about it. That's why you're here today. So anyway, we'll like Toby to explain a bit more about what it means to be a regenerative grower and what it means about regeneration as a whole.
Thank you very much, Claire. So we began a small market garden / small farm about 3 or 4 years ago. We're only growing we have an area of 4 acres, and we're only currently growing on 1 acre of land. And we're able to produce food for approximately 40 to 50 families off that 1 acre. We obviously took a deep dive when we decided to start farming. We took a deep dive into things like soil health, things like, as Claire mentioned, some of the real issues surrounding farming, surrounding the way in which we buy food, and us as consumers, what we expect, when we go to a supermarket, what we expect in terms of price point, and what we expect in terms of the quality of a fruit or a vegetable, and the kind of shapes and things like that, all these different things. So, ultimately, we took this deep dive into the subject and found that there was great problems with the supply chains, with the farmers like ourselves were being paid. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback, aren't I? I move away from the speaker. That might help. Yeah, I think that does help actually. So our aim is to try and bring about some sort of fundamental change to the way in which consumers interact with their food. So we want it to be a situation where consumers like yourselves maybe can come and view our farm. We have an open door policy where you can come and see all the processes that we do. So we're very transparent in that way, which largely is not the case in agriculture. Largely agriculture is a kind of a minefield, as I'm sure a lot of you know. Whenever you kind of look into some of the decisions you make about your consumerism, you instantly find that there's all kinds of pitfalls and problems that rear their head immediately. So we want to try and create a system whereby consumers and like yourselves and people in general are much more in touch with their food and where it comes from, and much more aware of obviously what it takes to produce this food. And in doing so, obviously, it gives way to a whole new conversation about what we do expect from our food and from our suppliers. because largely at this point, most people who are supplying to supermarkets are having to do so on the back of subsidies, etc. They're really struggling to be able to meet these points. And if they were not using large amounts of fertilizer, artificial fertilizers and herbicides, etc., they would be unable to produce this large quantity of food. So there's a lot of questions in this subject around kind of how best to kind of combat this. And in our case, we think we've done our best to kind of create a system in which we are looking after soil, we're increasing biodiversity, we're ensuring that there's higher amounts of organic material in the soil, so therefore better water percolation. On our small scale setup, we do not till or disturb the soil at all, which for us is much more easy than on a large scale setup, but we in doing so are able to see the real benefits to the soil. I mean, year on year we're seeing growth of soil. I mean, where we are based in the Fens, there is already a lack of soil. It's an area of land that was previously drained. So the type of soil we have is a small layer of soil on top of peat. And obviously it's a very interesting kind of environment because the water table is very high. So in order that we can actually grow in areas like this, it has to be drained regularly. So the whole area is crisscrossed with drains. And in our situation, we've been finding that we are able to hold water better than our neighbouring farms. We're able to obviously water a lot less. Our fertility comes entirely from composts, so we have no artificial inputs in that regard. And as I say, we're able to produce food for approximately 50 families a week, which is sizable from our small area. So we really are trying to champion this and hopefully encourage people to kind of take a look at what they're doing, the choices they're making when they're buying from whether it be supermarkets or anywhere, and just maybe think about making the inconvenient choice. Because that's what it really takes initially, is to make the inconvenient choice for yourselves in order that we can make a better choice for us all and for the planet as a whole. Because initially speaking, I mean, it's a very difficult thing to actually produce food and to obviously, as a farmer, to take all these risks, to actually plant a load of food and hopefully in 3 or 4 months, this will then produce a crop that becomes edible. And if it doesn't, we're not, subsidized by anything. We have no fallbacks. So largely, it's also about making a system in which consumers and producers can some way share some responsibility as well for how we can produce this food. So it's lovely to see all of you here very interested clearly in the subject. And I think, as Claire said, there is plenty of information out there. And, like your website, for example, 6 Inches of Soil has a really in-depth look at all these different subjects. And it would be wonderful if we could try to, in the not so distant future, move towards a system of helping large-scale producers find better ways to do things as well. Because the point is one of the major points is that they still need to make a living. And of course, farming being so heavily subsidized, it's necessary that we make some, on a legislative level, at a policy-making level, we make some decisions which may not be totally convenient for us initially, and it sort of was alluded to in the film, in the short clip you saw, that it may not be something that becomes lucrative for a farmer to do, and it's going to likely be a loss initially, but it's necessary, and it's necessary that we all support that movement as well. And as consumers, we're going to have to make those necessary choices to support producers who are making better ecological decisions around soil and around all the other aspects of farming that we've mentioned.
Yeah, I was going to say one not far from you actually, was a farm you should see. There's a really cool organisation called Nature Friendly Farming Network, and in fact Martin Lyons, who's leading it, is in with government the entire time. The guy is literally a force of nature. He farms about 600 acres in Cambridgeshire land, which is like full-on arable hellhole sort of thing half the time. And but he is this little oasis where his biodiversity is a big thing. He's kind of boosted, but he is now he said to me, I'm comparing myself, I've done a full-on test, and I may not be farming to the margin, I am not producing as many crops as the guy next door spraying, but I've been doing quality tests, and my quality is coming out better. So we're actually, at the end of the day, taking the same amount of products to market, but his products are way better. Like, he's practically got rid of all his sprays and everything, and it's completely amazing to hear. And when you go there, the change in his farm, I went there 2 years ago, is extraordinary. The biodiversity, the meadow I went into, the bluebells I saw, the butterflies, it was such a change in 2 years. He's been doing it for about 8 years, but he's now finally seeing, and that really, in the kind of, if you're going for a long-term fix, this is what we should be looking at, 7 to 10 year, change and increasing their rotation and diversity. Some of these farmers are really beginning to see it's working, and they're reducing their costs. Like, it's really phenomenal, but also giving back to all of us. Like, we're all going to get better food. I mean, we can't go on eating what's coming out of our fields anymore, but we have no choice because it's so flipping expensive to do any other way. So, these sort of organisations need supporting. I mean, this guy, like, he goes, you can be, or any of you guys can be a member at Farmers Camp for free, and they have workshops the entire time, this organisation, sharing work from everywhere. Nature Friendly Farming Network. And they really are, they're coming up time and time again, they're standing up against the NFU. The NFU are sadly, I'm sorry if anyone here works at the NFU, they're not doing anything about it. They go for the lowest common denominator, which is fine, but they won't push for the change. They're still talking about yields, and they're still talking about feeding the world in a way, which is a load of crap, because all it is waste. We have so much waste. A third of our food's wasted, and that is what we're dealing with. So if they could support those people and make that change, and listen to farmers, like, they don't listen. I saw Therese Kofi at an event this week. It was this amazing thing called Groundswell. If you ever want to go to an event where you want to feel like, I literally call it Heartswell. It just made me cry. There were farmers there who they're doing it on their own. They are literally not waiting for anyone else. They're just doing it. They're there talking, and you just come away going, we are not, like, people like me and Toby who believe in it, and any of you probably, you don't feel alone. You don't feel like, okay, look at all these people who are doing it. It's going, like, in 3 years, it's the third one I've been to, and it had gone from 2,000 people to 6,000 farmers. A lot of them hardcore farmers looking over the fence. A lot of them companies who are going to pay for those farmers to change, like Savills and all these other people who represent the Crown estate and the church and Crown own most of the land in this country. And, they're going to take them on this journey. And that's what we need. We don't need silver bullets. We don't need innovative stuff that's going on to produce the next tractor that's going to fly to the moon and give you whatever, or the next vertical farming. We need to invest in what's on the ground now and do long-term solutions, not short-term. So that's my rant. You can, I'll stop.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true. I think, just to go back to our sort of context, I think, and that's another point actually, is that it's very important to look at the context in which farms are farming, and obviously kind of take a holistic view of what we're doing, because there's plenty of methodologies out there, and I can kind of detail some of those in a second, but there's plenty of methodologies out there, but one may not work for your situation, and one may work for another, and it's very important that it's an open dialogue as well. And as you say, there's no silver bullet, and there's no kind of, this is going to be the ticket that will save us all, as it were. It's an ongoing kind of discussion and kind of a look into basically how best to kind of make this work with, as you say, what we have in place, because it's not a case of just bringing about the new, as you say, a new piece of equipment that will change, the ability to not plow or whatever. It's also about kind of utilising what we have, which is a good movement and a good amount of energy towards just as much as possible thinking about those 5 tenets, whether it be soil, whether it be biodiversity, whether it be water retention and water percolation, because that's a really, really important one. Particularly as a grower now, we see, more and more periods of long periods of drought. And as I say, we feel well insulated using some of the methodologies we're using compared to other growers around us who, because of the fact that they're largely relying on, fertilizers, artificial fertilizers, and their soil becomes less of a living substrate and more of some sort of just a medium, a growing medium. It could be anything, and you pump in what it needs. And in doing so, it reduces greatly the insulative value of the soil. The kind of, if you have a an adverse weather event, etc., we are much better placed to deal with that with healthy soils. And without healthy soils, we will not be able to deal with that, and largely you get crop failures, and this is what can lead to really, really major problems in our supply chains, etc.
I just want to ask you, because I think he and I discussed it earlier, how does working with soil make you feel? Because you were very passionate. We love asking people this question. I can ask any of you, because people's faces change. You can ask like Henry Dimbleby, the guy who's like leading, as people are calling him, the food czar. We asked him about soil. He just turned from this kind of man talking about policy and serious stuff to almost like a child again. It was really lovely.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, there's a real capture in working with the ground. It's something. We know as well, it's been proven that there is some antidepressant qualities. There are some bacteriums in soil that are found which have antidepressant qualities. There's that, obviously, which plays a role. But I think also there's something really wholesome, obviously, about working with soil. It's not for everyone, certainly, but it's a great thing to do. And it'd be wonderful to see more and more people becoming involved in these small-scale farms, even on just a simple volunteer basis, maybe once a year even. It'd just be wonderful to see people doing that, because I think people get great benefit from working in those environments. And for those people, particularly in urban environments who perhaps don't have gardens, etc., to do that, it can be life-changing, really, really ultimately life-changing.
Hello. From a global perspective, where do you think just all the different countries in the world are on this journey, as in trying to do something, or some better than others, or does everybody have this? Because I can imagine that there's lots of people in every country, I don't know that, but who feel passionately about it, but are there some that are making more headway? Perhaps you don't know the answer, I don't know, but just...
this week I was with the most amazing woman, again, if anyone wants to dig into this subject. She's called Nicole Masters. She's probably my new pin-out, but anyway, there you go. I never reveal into pop stars particularly, but she's definitely very cool. She's New Zealander, so she's really good to come over here and talk, because they work with temperate climate. And she's now gone to America, actually, because in New Zealand, I always think of it as a really green and amazing place. I'm just giving you a simple example. But apparently, they're doing some really destructive things ecologically. So she's moved away to America, who, although we all know is bonkers and huge, but apparently they're really good at allowing innovative people like her, that there's this amazing movement. And there's Kiss the Ground, and if you've seen that, it's an American film. There's quite a lot of American footage. That's one reason we're doing our film. We wanted more of a British story. So it is happening in America. But the interesting thing she said to me this week was the groundswell event I've just been to, they don't have one of those in America. So there are pockets of these amazing people doing it, but they're not, sadly, all coming together yet. So it depends on the country. I would say that Scandinavia are pretty phenomenal, because what we don't have, one thing we want to drive in this film, is our food policy is broken, because we look at farming, food and health separately, which is completely bonkers. Like, so many food discussions happen without farmers. How does that make any sense, let alone health people? So it's trying to pull all that, and the big campaigners want to pull that together. But you see that more in places, I think Scandinavia, are doing it quite well. Like in France and Italy, they actually want to have organic, and they have a policy where you have to have a certain amount of organic and well-grown food in schools and stuff, because the food that we have in our schools is not. And so, those are sort of simple examples. Yes, it's happening everywhere, and I think you're right, it's probably pockets, but some governments are listening more than others. So.
And just to add to that as well, there is obviously the context of places wherein, you mentioned India earlier. There are places in the context where they are fundamentally using organic methodologies, and often not because they want to, or they are, this is because they are forced by their context to do to use these systems, which in some cases are less efficient for them than others. But because your point sort of alludes to a position that if we look at it from a really grand scale, there will be countries that of course are less able to perhaps bring about this change as rapidly as we might like, or less able to facilitate this change, and that's certainly true. But it's necessary and important that those pioneers, as you mentioned, pioneers in places like America and the Scandinavian kind of countries, that we set these examples that one day we may find that it's possible that planetarily we're able to totally make a shift towards a regenerative methodology. And obviously, even the term regenerative can be so miasmic. It's such a big, broad term, and largely being kind of hijacked by some big ag players, as it were, that say, well, yeah, of course you can be regenerative. All you have to do is increase your herbicide use. So there are some issues within that, and it's necessary for us to actually take the time to look and find out for ourselves. I know it's hassle, I know it's difficult, and I know everyone has a lot of other things to do in a day, but it is important to be conscientious about it wherever possible, about how we buy, who we're buying from, and what we're eating. And as Claire mentioned, I mean, it is insanity that we don't view food as being integral to health in the way that it should be. I mean, we don't view them as being symbiotic in that way, and they are, absolutely. So if we invested less money perhaps in some of the remedial health initiatives, and maybe initially and try to make it more of a step out and try and provide better food for people, basically. As you say, in schools in France, there is quotas for amounts of organically produced food, and it would be wonderful to see things like that coming in the UK. And the UK has one of the smallest organic vegetable markets of anywhere in Europe. So there's plenty of room for us to grow, absolutely plenty of room for us to grow, and plenty of room for uptake within our society.
I was going to say one thing, just Land Workers Alliance, that if any of you know, is phenomenal, and that's actually part of the Via Campesina network. And so we constantly should be looking at the indigenous populations throughout the world who can teach us stuff. We can do the same here in Britain, but that's constantly coming back. That's where Vandana Shiva, etc., will share that work, and we must learn from people who've forever been doing it and have good results, and that's a place to look. But sadly, at the moment in the world, with both big pharmaceutical and big ag, it sort of leads us down. Sorry, you were going to ask another thing.
I was just going to say your point about shared responsibility, in terms of the way forward, between consumers and producers, and almost the parallels with sort of recycling and sort of people feeling like they're better informed or educated, or and therefore want to make a difference. Do you feel clear about what will make that kind of bridge between consumers feeling informed and aware that they have the responsibility to do something in this? I assume that your film is also about educating people so that because that feels like the gap. If you find out about it, it's a no-brainer, but almost what do you then do as a consumer to make it happen?
Yeah, that's why we don't want to give people sort of present ideas or complex situations without them being able. So we're going to have resources to dig into and that's where working with something like there's this organisation Country Trust, where we filmed with some children for the film. They're taking children onto farms, and then there's this thing called Leaf that has Open Farm Sunday, and all those sort of things are really great for educating. One of the biggest gaps, sadly, is the agricultural colleges in this country are really backward. They don't really teach. Soil is this tiny little thing, which is quite amazing. Machinery is this giant ability. So they're pretty archaic, and that's some reasons will be funding, I'm sure. But also it's just, that's the way they've been. So they're trying to change things. And someone like Harper Adams, one of the biggest ones, their biggest investors at the moment, McDonald's and Sainsbury's and Tesco. So yes, they're trying to do good things, but if they're leading our way, I don't know about you, it makes me feel a little bit alarmed. So yeah, but 100%.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that as well, I think on our scale, obviously being a very small scale producer, we have the benefit of being able to interact with our clients, the customers, in a way that perhaps obviously large farms can't. And obviously often we sell directly, which is a great benefit as well. Whereas, going to a supermarket and pulling something off the shelf feels somewhat removed from the process. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly necessary that we kind of educate people as much as we can, but on our scale at least, it's certainly more doable, just because we have that direct, connection to our customers. And I think obviously there is a growing movement. Claire mentioned the Kiss the Ground film, which is a film that can be found on Netflix, for example, and I know there was a lot of buzz when it was released. People that obviously, sort of people, my peers, who maybe hadn't fully absorbed all the things I've been talking about for these years, kind of saw the film and thought, oh wow, this is a really, really important, and it really kind of hit home some of the terrible things that are taking place in the industry as well. So as far as educating educating people in a way to kind of better, what am I looking for? Basically, to educate people so that they ultimately are making better decisions about what they're purchasing and the way that they're purchasing them. I mean, one of the key things as well is to go and look locally. That's essential. We talk about local and seasonal, and it's important to really value those tenets and actually think about, is it truly local, and is it truly seasonal, or is it seasonal in Morocco, or is it wherever? And these things are obviously quite relevant to the concept to the conversation on food. And yeah, I mean, if we're able to kind of even just more regularly consider those things. I'm not saying it's an everyday thing, because it will drive you insane probably. It's a very difficult thing to kind of really look at everything we do and overanalyze it to that extent. And there's a lot of pitfalls in our society that are kind of set up where it just seems natural for us to go and do this or to buy that or whatever. And as I say, it's about just as much as one possibly can, just giving as much time to it as possibly can, and thinking about that, and after a while it becomes kind of second nature. You just, it's just something that's part of what you're thinking. The thinking you have around food and where you are shopping, etc. Is there any other questions?
No, I always hate these questions when we do talks, but I hope it's not a mean one. But I feel like you guys will know more. I've been out of the UK for a long time, so I don't know. When I left 7 months ago, where at the moment are the UK on the transition from the current subsidies situation to ELMS? I don't know where it ended up with ELMS. Do you have any little info on that? Thanks. Being pulse the question.
No, that's fine. I didn't get down to that one, but so there's a thing called Environmental Land Management Scheme, which is replacing the current subsidies. So it's a bit more complex for farmers. Not that they need any more complexity, because their job's hard enough. But at the moment, the first one that's being launched is the Sustainable SFIs, Sustainable Finance Initiative, or whatever it is. Anyway, they are being rewarded for doing good with soils, putting things like hedgerows in, and it's all to do with their kind of natural capital, as they call what they've got on the farm to offer. So they're all now having to look at soil testings and everything, but it's still coming through and is now beginning to drip through. But one of the contentious things is some of those farmers that we're showing have been doing it for a while aren't going to be paid for the work they've already done. It's going to be all the future stuff. So I spoke to a farmer the other day, went, it's brilliant, I've done nothing yet, but I now know the stuff I'm going to be rewarded. And I was like, how can that be right? So I've been at lots of things with DEFRA, and they are coming out, and the farmers are guiding, they are listening, but it's very complex. And I think the trouble is the farmers aren't going to need help to fill in these slightly more complex forms, but it is happening. But of course, again, it ends up sometimes being the more savvy ones, or maybe the ones that have got extra staff to help them. So it's not that easy, but that's kind of where they're at. Yeah, so the subsidies, so we are 23, from next year, they're meant to be phasing them out. I think by 27 they will all have gone with the current subsidy system. But what the other thing is happening is that all the private money is trying to invest in it, to say that, whether it's carbon, can be paid for your carbon, etc. So there's this whole thing, but that at the moment is a bit of a wild west. And for example, I found out recently that we don't have a directive from government, let alone from Europe, let alone from our government. There is on soil, there is on water and air, but not soil. So there's no framework. So at the moment we have a ton of different soil tests. So if I'm a farmer, I want to test it, or Toby wants to do this thing, he can go to one company, I can go to another, we have different results, but we can still be paid. So that, but for me, it's alarm bells. It's like, wow, they could be, and then you're going to be given for what. Anyway, it's all a bit of a wild west, and companies are jumping on it. There are lots of big banks at all these places now saying we're doing this, and anyway, so that's it. I'm not going on to my other. We'll all go to sleep, but there you go.
Just one additional point on that. I spoke with a farmer from Dorset who has been desperately trying to find one upside of Brexit. And he said actually the only thing he's been able to identify as being positive potentially from Brexit is this potential for a scheme to be now based on. That doesn't look good. There's now the potential for the scheme to be based on a more ecological basis rather than just land mass, which is something that obviously was previously done a lot more. So there is that potential that these schemes could potentially offer, a more ecologically sound payment scheme, basically, which is beneficial. I mean, there are a lot of pitfalls in it too, but there is some light at the end of the tunnel potentially on that one. And I know it's so easy to get cynical when we talking about these subjects. It's just nice to have a moment of a moment of optimism. Yes. The schemes. So there's things like they're talking about bringing in diversity-based planting schemes. So basically, if you bring in diverse hedgerows, you can be paid on those bases, planting of trees, etc., and increasing of your biodiversity. There's a lot to be hammered out there, but it's the idea being is that now that theoretically, now that we can actually kind of make a decision on our specific behalf, which is important to do in some contexts, and in this context, it's important to make a decision, obviously, for Britain about British farmers and how best to use, how best to address, let's say, some of the issues of the previous payment schemes, which were based on entirely, largely, land masses and things like that, which obviously leads farmers to tear hedgerows out, because in that case it means that they're then paid more because they have more land mass, etc. So there's all these different potential benefits, but it'll take, as Claire was mentioning, it'll take the next 2 to 3 years for us to work out exactly how these schemes are going to transpire. But this farmer was very optimistic of this one fact. So I think there are some positives to be seen in that, possibly.
Yeah, hopefully it'll benefit all of us if it all goes to plan. But anyway, we need to support our farmers, and that's one reason our film is all about educating, is to get people to sort of fall for soil, try and understand a bit more about farming, and to kind of make that connection, because we're all a bit disconnected. But farmers will tell you they're disconnected too. Like, they sell their grain and they don't have a clue where it goes. So it's a lot of farmers are now trying to have mills on their farms or work together. The other cool thing that farmers are doing is working together, like cluster groups are coming, so they're learning together, applying for funds together. And so that's a really positive, cool stuff. So if I've said to farmers, why aren't you a member? They were like, oh, we haven't. But actually, the ones that are working together, it's really cool.
And that can really help close the loops as well on some of these processes, because obviously, if you have farmers with waste products from processing something, that may be actually a valuable product to another farmer. So actually, working. Quite, yeah. So, for example, wool can be used as a great mulch. So, farmers like myself can utilise, waste wool that other sheep farms perhaps might, otherwise have to either store or throw away. And there's plenty of other examples like that. And it's very important that in order that we kind of close some of these systems and try and have as little inputs, necessary on the farms, that we actually kind of, we work in this way and try and find other like-minded farmers who may have something to offer us, basically, in that way. We are entirely vegetables, so we do all sorts of seasonal vegetables, which is, again, even in that regard, because we're so small scale, we're able to do a wide variety. But the majority of farmers who are arable farming are farming in monocultures, which again is another kind of point of contention. we could go on and on and on about things like that. But just to kind of just go back to soil, which is sort of the topic of this conversation largely, it's fascinating to know that some of the best soils we have remaining in the country are found in domestic gardens. And the reason being for that is that farmers obviously have, since the 1950s, been pumping terrible amounts of artificial chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides and herbicides into their land mass, and they've also simultaneously been tilling, a great deal, and the super mechanization post the 1950s of farming has led to massive great swathes of land being farmed by a single individual with a massive tractor, with huge great apparatus that can ultimately cause a lot of problems to the soil. And the reason that the soil is so good in a domestic garden is because people don't do that largely. Most people are not out there digging their soils over, disturbing and breaking up the networks within the soils, which we found through rigorous testing is actually one of the most essential parts of maintaining fertility, etc., is actually maintaining the networks in the soil, because these things are all present in soil. It's just whether or not they're bioavailable to the roots of the plants, etc. And in order to make this possible, it's very important that we try not to disturb soil as much as possible. So it's if you yourselves go into your gardens, you'll find that you probably have some of the top grade soil in the country, and that's quite shocking to consider.
And all you need to look for is the lowly worm. It's not lonely, it's phenomenal. So if your worms are there, which they won't be at this time of the year because it's dry and they'll be underneath, but then they're the keystone species in the soil. So if you've got them, they are living off everything else, the microbes and fungi.
That's it.
Is that right, Toby?
The worm is the small plough.
There's massive other things there, millions and billions.
Yes,
but that's one thing we can see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's all sorts of things inside soil biology, but the mycorrhizal fungi networks are incredibly important as well. We found that obviously the better the networks in the soil, the better and more insulated that the soil will be, as I said before, to things like drought and other adverse weather conditions, and even particularly soil erosion, which is another big problem. So by keeping soil covered as much as possible, whether it be with cover crop or in other methodologies, that we use additions of compost, which again just allows water retention, greater water retention, because the more organic material we have in the soil, the greater the water retention is, and therefore prevents a lot of the erosion that a lot of farms do suffer from. So if in our case, if we can basically keep our soils covered as much as possible, one of the playoffs for us is obviously understanding it in the commercial sense. We do have to make some money. We do have to actually grow these vegetables, get them out of the ground, and obviously sell them. So there are times when you can't meet the standard that you would want to, the absolute primo standard that you would want to. But that's part of the journey, and we must obviously, as far as possible, do our best, and obviously try and find better methodologies in the future that can kind of alleviate some of those difficulties as well. Is there any other questions? Let me.
So some Welsh farmers that I've spoken to who have tried to diversify and grow more sustainably have said that in order for that to be economically feasible, they've had to add a touristic element to what they do and offer workshops and have people come and visit. And in some ways it's great that is an option, but it's also an added layer of stress, and they have to kind of suddenly have a capacity to do that. Is that something that you've also seen, or what do you think about that?
Farmers, someone was, I think the older farmer could survive on the subsidies, but nowadays the farmers are doing these stacking enterprises, and they're having to, but they are so, I'm marvel, my grandpa was a farmer and I've been involved in growing for a long time, but I marvel at, they are multifaceted people, they are caring, they're growing stuff, but then they're running, you're right, their caravan business or a holiday business or whatever it is on the side, and it's happening more and more because they're having to do it, and the stress is phenomenal, which is why depression and suicide is huge in farming, and a lot of them are doing it alone, a lot of them because they now have these bigger tractors and everything, and a lot of it's automated. There might just be one or two of them doing it, and that's why, again, working together, but it's absolutely massive. And again, that's why we need to challenge the system, because they're not being paid properly. And it's so long. The supply chains are bonkers. They are so long. It is crazy. So the supermarket will blame the middleman will blame the truck driver will blame the wrapping man, and then they'll blame the farmer. So it's we got stuck in the system. It was designed along cars. It came from Ford. We interviewed Tim Lang, and he said it was designed as Ford did the car factories. We designed our supply chains in supermarkets on that. This is fresh produce most of the time. It's something to marvel at. But yeah, they do. Masses of them do that.
That is a point to say that it is financially difficult particularly for established large-scale producers, to make that change, to pivot to a regenerative kind of methodology. I mean, there's a lot of studies out there. Rodale Institute have done some stuff on it. There's some studies out there that suggest that it actually is, beneficial within 2 years. I think it's entirely based on your context as to whether or not that can be, turned around in that fashion. And I think there is, as you say, a lot of these producers do need additional support, whether it be financial support or whether it be other organisations perhaps that could bridge those gaps, that could maybe do some of that work for them, that we could maybe have a whole industry perhaps could be formed out of this, because it is necessary. And as Claire mentioned, farmers have to wear many hats. So to add another one on and to ask them to then become salesmen as well is sometimes very difficult. And there are some examples of people doing that very successfully, what you've spoken about, kind of diversifying their farms and bringing people into, whether it be campsites or whether it be kind of ecotourism or various other things and forms of that. There are examples of people doing it very well, but in large numbers of people's contexts, it wouldn't work. I mean, for us, for example, we are off the beaten track. We're right up the one end of a dead-end drove, that's a mile long. People aren't going to stumble across us, so to speak, and it would take a lot of effort for us to really bring those people in. So yeah, absolutely, it's a good point you made there, and it's something that, again, going back to what I was saying about kind of education of consumers, it's important that as a consumer we do recognise that there may be price increases, and that is not something that's going to be always popular or easy to deal with. Particularly in the context of today with cost of living crisis, etc. But there are some farms that do some very interesting things, farms of our size that do some very interesting things where they have box schemes wherein they have a sliding scale. So it means that they're able to produce things for people and they will pay a higher price point such that someone else who may not be able to make that higher price point can actually still get the same quality of vegetables as well. So there are some interesting things like that, but again, that only works on often very small scales. So there is some thinking to be done around that, certainly.
I'm going to say one really positive thing is that if farmers have got this regenerative thing, let's call it regenerative, I don't like it too tough, or agroecological system, some of them actually come to a really nice place where they're spending less hours because they're not doing all the ploughing and everything. So they spend less hours doing, and then they can actually, sometimes they really enjoy doing those things because you're bringing those people in, those people then buy their products as well. So that tourism thing can sometimes, and then they've got people also around, it's buzzy. So it can be a really positive thing. And there's a really cool place up Henbant Farm, if you ever guys ever want to go, you can go and get experience up there. He's a really cool guy, he used to be a film producer, but you can go and work there and he's really connected with people and they've got like these really cool little huts you can sleep in. It's in Wales. But there's those places like that where actually those people staying there end up kind of volunteering and stuff. So there's like kind of some cool stuff as well amongst it. So.
Henbant Permaculture.
He's really cool, Matt Swarbrick. And they do courses there as well, really beautiful courses. And it's, in Wales. Anything else?
Oh yeah, so is it time to wrap up? Did we manage to do an hour? Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for listening. And it is wonderful to see everyone out here for an event like this. It really is lovely.
Thank you guys. I hope we didn't... we seem to still be sitting here, so thank you. It was brilliant. Thanks for your time. And thank you to Nourished Communities for inviting us.